we'll and I'll send this over to you after. Sweet. So awesome. We'll kick things off then. So yeah, Luke, welcome to season 2, episode 3 of the Fitness Burrito Podcast. So for those of you guys who haven't tuned into the podcast, my name's Dan Q. I'm the host, and today I'm pumped to have a fellow, well, I guess you're not an alumni, you're still studying, but a guy across the pond, so back in Canada, Luke MacMillan. And yeah, I used to go to uni with this guy. He's still studying. I remember seeing him in the gym, grinding away, hooping. We used to play pickup ball, and he actually used to blow by me, and I wouldn't tell anybody that till now because I'm 30 and considered washed up. But man, the guy was just like athletic, and yeah, and now he's deep into the fitness game. So super pumped to have you on, Luke. I was gonna kind of kick things off even further, but I feel like you have so many qualifications, you need to list them, or at least
Yeah,
let the people know what they're doing. So Luke, welcome, man. Yeah, tell the people, what you're about, where you're from, all that kind of stuff.
cool. Thanks a lot, Dan. Yeah, man, I've got a few qualifications, credentials that I've chased, mostly recently, I guess. Currently, I'm a master's student, so I'm studying under Wayne Albert. So I'm not sure if you knew Wayne. He's the dean of kinesiology at UMB. So currently trying to dive into a certain realm of research and kind of figure out what I want to, really conclude. So that's in the works right now, and I became a clinical exercise physiologist a couple of years ago, so that allows me to work with individuals with chronic disease. So that's currently the biggest credential that I've been using in relation to my full-time job, clinical exercise physiologist. And then I'm a CSCS, so Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist. PES is Performance Enhancement Specialist. CES is Corrective Exercise Specialist, and then I'm a High Performance Specialist too. So there's a few certs that I've kind of chased, and when you have the funding from your employer, then I think it's advantageous to go after some of these things. And I think that even some of these certifications where, I've studied a few performance related certifications, but I always end up learning a few additional criteria, I guess, each time I study for one of those. So those are some of my credentials. Again, the CEP being what I use most during my day job. And my day job is working with injured soldiers or those who struggle with chronic disease on base. So that's kind of like my 9 to 5. I'm an exercise specialist out on base Gagetown. So, if someone gets injured or if someone has a chronic disease like MS, or, they're struggling with narcolepsy or an injury like patellofemoral syndrome or something like that, then, the surgeon or the physio will refer them to me. And then I'll try to get those soldiers back up to a functional level so that they're ready to perform in field.
Yeah, so for everybody out there who's maybe taken like way too long to finish a simple task, hopefully Luke's made you feel pretty shit about yourself with all those qualifications just listed off, because this guy is he's just going off. And yeah, man, that's awesome. I mean, first thing that just shows that UNB breeds different people. So University of New Brunswick, stand up. That's where we went to university. Most people have no idea where that is, especially in the UK. East Coast, Canada, probably. Well, I say some of the cheapest places to buy a house, but I feel like prices are going up these days because of Corona, from what I keep hearing. So if you've never been to the East Coast, go check it out. Great people, great seafood, and by the sounds of it, some great personal trainers and coaches and exercise physiologists. So, no, that's awesome, Luke. So super pumped to have you on because clearly you're a knowledgeable guy. And I'm actually gonna kind of go down more the performance route today on the podcast. Usually, we kind of keep things a bit more kind of like, I wouldn't say simple, but we just don't really dive in performance stuff. So it's usually more kind of like simple training concepts, nutrition, stuff like that. So the first kind of thing I want to chat through, mate, was just in terms of increasing vertical, because obviously you're a basketball guy, I'm a basketball guy, and Luke back in the day, how long did it take you to increase your vert? You trained on that for a while, didn't
I
you?
trained pretty hard for at least a couple of years, man, to get that up. And I mean, I started training in high school to a certain extent, and took my training very seriously in first year, I guess.
Mhm.
But A few years at least. Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember just I'm like he used to be in the gym. We'd be practicing, and he'd be there beforehand, and I was playing on the uni team, and like I just remember watching you, and like you'd put you don't not YouTube videos up, but Insta videos or just little videos up of you flying, and that's kind of what I want to ask you first, I guess, is if someone wanted to increase their vertical, they want to jump higher, somebody like you who's done it, how would you break that down in simple terms, and if you were to like break it down in phases, what would that look like?
Yeah, man. Well, I mean, how tall are you, Dan? You're 5'11" ish, right?
Yeah,
Six feet.
like 6,
Well,
not
or you're
even
six
six
one.
one.
You're
Yeah,
6'1".
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I'm about 5'11". So the journey's hard for people under 6 feet, I guess. So simple terms, man, I think that you got to look at periodization over a 1 year cycle kind of thing. So a lot of people get caught up in what am I doing this week for my training? What am I doing today for my training? What am I doing this month? And I think like a great piece of advice would be look at big picture. Let's break this down into an annual macro cycle, we'd call it, right?
Mhm.
And let's figure out what this periodization would look like. So, for example, we would like to go more from general to specific prep to like a first transition to competitions. What that means is for people that don't really understand that lingo is, you want to start with more endurance type training, even though we're trying to get more explosive. But if you're looking at an annual macro cycle, we want to start with kind of that endurance hypertrophy type training, so that we can increase cross-sectional area in our muscles, right? So we want bigger muscles to start because bigger muscle has the potential to be a stronger, more powerful muscle, right? So I feel like that's something that people often miss, right? So I think if people, started with that hypertrophy, more endurance-based training, moved into more specific strength stuff. Okay, now we're pushing our reps down a little bit lower towards 7, 6, 5, and we're working more strength. And then go right into like a first transition or competition type phase where we're training strictly power. That would be optimal in terms of laying out a year. And then after that power phase, you don't want to stay there for too long either, right? Because then you get all sorts of injuries and things like that as well. So you don't want to stay there for too long, and you want to kind of repeat the cycle sort of thing. I mean, there's other types of periodization called undulating periodization and things like that, where it's almost more random in intensities and things like that. But I think that would be pretty optimal for a lot of people in terms of breaking it down.
Definitely. And I think that, like you just said, there's so many different types of training.
Mhm.
And, you go on Instagram right now, and if you've even looked at anything jump related in the last couple of months, I guarantee your phone's going to have ads from some guy who's jumping out of the gym going, buy my program for $50 or 50 pounds, wherever you are in the world. And I guarantee you'll get this amount, right? And
Mhm.
I think a lot of times it's like people get caught up in that. They always kind of look for that new shiny thing, don't they? So a few things you mentioned in there, I think, which is worth breaking down. So macro cycle, like Luke said, is you usually look at it, let's say, from a year perspective. So across that whole year is a macro. And then you can break that down into mesocycles, which are, let's say, quarterly periods of that year, right? What are you focusing on that quarter? So, like Luke said, you might do, endurance hypertrophy work, then you might start going into a bit more strength work, and then you might go into a bit more power work, and so on and so forth. And then if you kind of scale that even further, you have micro cycles, which might be anywhere from, I don't know, a couple weeks to maybe 3, 4 weeks, right? And I know people look at it differently too. Like there's so many different ways of looking at it, but that's kind of what he was talking about there. One thing that I thought I'd ask you further, which when you were talking about power, I think a lot of people struggle to define power.
Mhm.
When you hear strength and hypertrophy, most people kind of know what that is. What do we mean by power? What's that look like? Like, what are some example exercises?
Yeah, I think this is a very important subject because if you want to become more powerful, you need to know what that means and how to get there. And especially as trainers, we have an obligation to be able to understand these terms and be able to pass that criteria along to whoever we're training. So power equals force times velocity. Okay, so I envision a force velocity curve. Obviously, like some of your listeners may not be able to envision this, but you just need to understand that there's kind of two ends of the spectrum to power. So
Mhm.
there's force or more strength related training. That would be like slow 3 rep maxes and things like that, really, really heavy strength related work. And then there's the other end, which would be, surround around velocity, right? Or rate of force development, like very, very, very quick movements and things like that. And power kind of lands right in the middle of strength and velocity, power and velocity, right? So I think it's important to recognize that, you can't just train on one side of strength the whole time and become powerful. You're going to become strong. You're going to be able to move big loads, right? But it might be at a slow tempo. And you can't just train at, a high rate of force development side or a high velocity side, like sprinting in full stride and things like that, because you have no load or we haven't increased load or intensity very much, right? So it's important to train both sides, first of all, of that force velocity curve. And then it's important to meet that training somewhere in the middle so that we can optimize our power. That's kind of how I like to explain it to people, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. So I think even just throwing in an example might be, doing some like weighted jumps where you're not going super heavy, right? You're not doing like your 1 3 rep max where you're, barely getting up under the bar, but then you're also not just doing body weight. Like you can find so many body weight kind of plyometric programs out there, which is still really good, but you still have to have, like Luke said, elements of strength and power and speed or velocity based training. So that makes sense. I think one thing I was going to ask you from the strength side
Yep.
is, when you were, I mean, are you still dunking? I'm sure you're still dunking.
Well, Duncan, man.
Yeah, you're still dunking. So when, I guess, for the guys out there that think, my squat, my like 1 rep max is directly correlated to how high I jump, which is still a huge, like, kind of like idea that people have in their head. Would you agree? Or would you say that, like, realistically, 1.5 times my body weight is probably enough before I start focusing on other things?
So I think, a 1RM squat can be a good performance indicator, right? It can show you that, you've trained one end of the spectrum really, really well. But at the same time, there are definitely going to be athletes that have a very, very high 1RM squat and can't get off the ground as well, right? So they don't have that other end of the spectrum. So I think that's most important. And, obviously the most apparent test to measure your vertical jump would be a simple vertical jump test, right? Or something with force plates underneath you that would measure, the force in the ground, right? But 1RM, it can be misleading, right? So if you have a bigger athlete that's just been training strength the whole time at slow tempos, and their body weight might be a little bit too high, and they haven't been training high velocity, then they're not going to be able to develop a whole lot of power.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one thing in the recent kind of 6 months or so that I've started to, because I've just been like reading stuff and studying stuff from just guys that are way ahead of the game in terms of where I am right now, realizing that a lot of it is, like you said, about, how fast can I get off the ground, right? How much power do I have? Yeah, it's great to have a 2 time my body weight squat, but like I said, or like you said, sorry, if I got, 400 pounds on my back, and then next, and maybe 3 months from then I can squat 450, but my vert's not going up, then clearly there's something missing. It's not always about getting stronger. So I think a lot of people need to realize that strength is great, but there's so many other components to jumping high, running fast, speed, agility. It's not always requiring the bar. Cool. So I guess next question, this perfect kind of carryover, is what are some of the biggest mistakes that you've seen, or maybe that you even done yourself, when it comes to trying to just like get stronger, jump higher, get quicker? What would you say some of the common mistakes you see with like your clients or people in your gym or even yourself you've done?
Mm. Yeah, so a few come to mind. First of all, with the jumping higher, just because I've spent some time, considering this, I guess. And so the first one would be using plyometric training and training too high of reps, right? So and not having a proper understanding of the energy systems and what our appropriate rep range should be for plyometric training. So a lot of people, when they do plyometrics, you see people doing a lot of HIIT training and things like that. That's great for a whole bunch of metabolic reasons, but I mean, if your main goal is to increase power, then in my opinion, you should, and the research would show that our rep range should be more ideally that 1 to 5 rep range with a couple minutes of rest in between, so that we're really taking advantage of the PCR system, the phosphocreatine system, right? And we're not going into like anaerobic or aerobic glycolysis, right? More, longer duration exercise type energy systems,
Yeah.
right? So, even if the listeners don't understand all of the nitty gritty exercise science stuff, it's just important to recognize that, when you go up and you try to dunk a basketball or something like that, you're not going to jump 12 times before you do it, right? So
Mm.
the ideal rep range is going to be 1 to 5, and ideally you take some rest in between so that you optimize your performance. And then the other thing would be going down hard, limiting that bottom phase of the exploding up back into your vertical jump. So we call that the amortization. So if you're going down, you're getting some knee bend, and then you're extending, you're coming up into your jump. Really trying to shorten that phase at the bottom when you're at the bottom of your, like a half squat or quarter squat position.
Yeah.
Trying to limit that phase as much as possible. Be really, really quick in that turnaround from eccentric to concentric. Call that amortization. Limit that because there's a whole bunch of benefits in terms of stretch shortening cycle and how muscle spindles can help us produce more force to get up. And then when it comes to, just getting stronger and other components of fitness, I like to just go back to people not working hard enough.
Yeah. Okay.
And people not putting themselves in a position to maintain a habit because, as you've been involved in the fitness industry for a long time. Behavioral change is a massive component of this entire training thing, whether it's rehabilitation or performance, right? Behavior change is a part of working with clients and working with athletes. So ensuring that you're in a position that that you find the training at least entertaining or at least fun in a small capacity, right? So that you're going to do it over a long period of time, because you could be doing all of the right things, but if you stop after a month, it's not going to do you any good, right? So the people that stick with it long term, they're really going to get the results that matter.
Yeah, consistency. Yeah, so a few things that you said there. So if anybody that heard phosphocreatine and thought, what the hell is that? Don't worry about it. Just realize, like, we have energy systems, right? And by energy systems, we mean ways for our body to get energy to do the things that we want to do. And that first kind of 0 to 10, 0 to 15 seconds, imagine like Usain Bolt running 100 meters, like that phosphocreatine system, it's giving him all that energy right away. Once you kind of pass that 15, whatever kind of how many seconds you want to debate about, then we start going into the other ones, right? And what Luke's trying to say is if you're trying to jump high and you're working on your reps and their quality reps, then take a whole bunch of rest, make sure that energy system kind of like supplies itself, right? It's regenerating, and then keep going. I think a big reason why people do hit sessions with plyometrics and all that kind of stuff is they see NBA players and like basketball guys and athletes do these things over and over and over again and potentially not look tired. But you have to realize these guys have been doing this for like, 15, 20 years, nonstop training. And they've been able to kind of earn the right to train that way, right? They can probably do 8, 9, 10 quality reps of jumping and landing and absorbing and kind of producing force. Whereas me and Luke, well, Luke probably can, but I'm get to that point where my knees can't take it. So like maybe I've got 4 good dunks in the tank and then I'm done.
Well, Dan, and the other thing is we're not all genetically gifted, because I
Mm.
think the listeners should know this. Like a lot of these Instagram people, a lot of these people out on YouTube, or even professional athletes that post videos in relation to fitness and whatnot, I mean, no doubt they've been working hard, no doubt they've been training hard, and I would never take anything away from that. But you've got to recognize that, some people are able to train a certain way and yield results. And a lot of these people could be very genetically gifted in certain realms, right? And
Mhm.
you or I may not be that way. So
No, but we represent the white community very well. I
exactly.
I think we're getting up pretty good for white boys.
Yeah.
And I think the last point I want to piggyback on in terms of what you said for the strength stuff is, um, like obviously consistency was one. And it kind of goes back to the one of the first things at the beginning of the podcast was like there's so many different ways of doing things, right? And I think one of the biggest mistakes I made, and some of the biggest mistakes I even made with my clients when I first started coaching, was I tried to make it so complicated in terms of like how they were going to get stronger. All I should have focused on was, all right, this week we're going to lift 20 kilos. Next week we're going to lift 21 kilos. And then the
Yep.
week after that, we're going to lift 22 kilos, and like just literally putting weight on the bar rather than thinking, all right, this week we're going to do like 5 reps at 70%. And then next week we're going to do 3 reps at this. And then we're going to freaking take a rest, but we're not going to take a rest. And then they're like, what the hell is going on? And then I don't even know what's going on because I think I'm like doing some kind of crazy programming, when in reality, if they just practice doing the movement, if they just put a little bit more weight on the bar, and if every 4 to 5 weeks I give them a little bit of a deload week where they just kind of like decrease the volume a bit so they can recover, like I would have killed it. I probably wouldn't even be managing a gym. I'd just have a sick business still. So just a few things to think about out there because people try to overcomplicate it. Anything else you want to add on that, or you good?
I think that's good.
Sweet, sweet. Cool. So in terms of, if we wanted to get faster, okay, so if we wanted to get faster for a sport in general, what
Mhm.
would you suggest someone does? And I know we've kind of touched on a few things already, but because I know you've got the performance specialist kind of stuff in the background, and you've done so many qualifications, how would you go about training someone to get faster?
Yeah, so once you start talking about this, you realize that you're going to be applying a lot of the same principles, right?
Mm,
So, we're going to follow essential periodization in some capacity, and we're going to have a plan for what we're going to do over the course of an annual cycle, and break that down into smaller cycles. Um, we should recognize the importance of, I mean, it depends too, right? Depending on like the capacity in which you want to get faster for, whether it's a 20-meter sprint, a 200-meter sprint, if it's different sports and things like that. I mean, all of that plays into this question a little bit. But developing fast twitch muscle fibers would be important, right? So training at high intensities, and also focusing on
mm,
biomechanics and economy, we would call it as well, right? Like you hear of running economy and long distance running and things like that, but I mean, you could have economy of sprint form and things like that, right? So just ensuring that your biomechanics and your movement patterns are efficient, and you're producing optimal force, because you could train very, very hard and do all the things right, and if your form is off, or if your movement patterns, your kinetics, your kinematics are off, then you're kind of spinning your wheels a little bit, right?
mm.
uh,
How would
you
you go about, sorry, look, how would you go if I'm like, if I'm Joe Blow right now and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna get faster. I can't really afford a coach right now. What would you tell them? Look, go videotape yourself and then just compare it to, I don't know, like a fairly good sprinter. Like, how would you suggest they start? Because obviously we're talking about biomechanics. Some people might not know what that means or what that looks like. Would
Sure.
you just,
Yeah. Yeah, practical way that someone can do it at home. Yeah, I would videotape myself, or I'd ask someone to watch me, or ask someone to videotape myself. So if we're talking running, for example, then once you have that video, you can look at foot contact and things like that. And these are all things you can find online. These are all things you can learn about through a simple textbook. So if you're looking to be invested in a certain type of training, you're looking to put in some hard miles here, then this information is readily available. Like
Mhm,
you can have the certifications behind your name, or you can just study. So,
mm,
this information is readily available for people. So I would look at, foot contact, torso lean as well. Are you too, like, are you hyperextended? Are you almost lower doses while you're running? Or, there's a bunch of inefficient ways, like knee alignment. Do you have mal knee alignment and things like that? So you can take a look at a running stride from, a horizontal angle, a frontal angle, and things like that. And kind of break it down based on what the research is telling us is optimal, I guess. And if you have the essentials of strength training and conditioning by the NSCA, that they give out the CSCS certification. And I know they've got a good chapter in there about running mechanics and things like that. So that would be a good chapter to check out. And yeah, you can compare it to some of those notes in there.
mm. Okay,
Yeah.
that's good. And I guess if you were, I know you talked about it'd be similar to like the whole macro thing in terms of like how you plan for the year and then for the months and for the weeks. What would be like examples of maybe exercises that we would suggest somebody starts with? Like, let's say that first month we got someone who's fresh, like they're fairly athletic, they're about average, they could probably get a bit of strength gains, they could probably work on, everything we talked about, power, speed, velocity training, all that. What would be some stuff that maybe we would get them to do in the very beginning? Like what will we look at? What will we suggest they even look at themselves?
Yeah. So the first question I would say, I would ask is, when's your competition? When do you want to be at optimal performance, right? So do you have a race coming up? Do you have some sort of competition? Do you have the finals coming up and things like that? We lay that out as competition time. And then I'd set up my training around that competition, right? So that's very important for people to understand. And then, I don't care if they're ready for training at higher intensities, because I have an understanding of how I want to work this athlete up to their competition. Right. So even if they've been doing squat jumps and weighted squat jumps and all of this and that, I'm probably going to start them off with a slower tempo goblet squat. We're going to start weighting it with endurance hypertrophy type movements. We're going to break down each movement pattern. We're going to break down a squat. We're going to break down a hinge. We're going to break down a lunge. We're going to break down some single leg hinge work and things like that. We're going to break down a clean with dumbbells before we get to barbells. We're going to break all of this stuff down to ensure that there's proper education and proper foundational movements behind the athlete, I guess. So that's kind of how I would approach it initially. And then, progress the exercises from there. So I would start very basic in terms of movement patterns and watch for all the things that I would be looking for as a coach. And, some of those things that some of your listeners could be looking for would be ensuring proper knee tracking. That's always something that we would like to see. You don't want valgus knees going on your squats and things like that. Like, I'm a big spine guy. I love education of neutral spine and things like that. I recognize the practicality of it, especially when you're loading exercises. So do you have hyperlordosis in your lower back, or are you flexed on some of your deadlift or your hinge movements and things like that? Do you have pain? We don't want to train heavy or at high intensity with pain. So I would start to break some of those things down, and then, progress the exercises from there. So that's the fun part, right? Once all the foundational work is kind of set and you have an athlete that moves well and they're ready truly to be loaded and they're ready to train at higher intensities, that's the funnest part of it all, I think. So it's really rewarding also to see an athlete start from and almost, you'll have athletes approach you almost in a naive sense and talk as if they're ready for XYZ. But I think breaking it down and starting very foundational with a simplistic approach and progressing them when they're ready is probably the optimal way to do that, to reduce injury and optimize performance.
I think you just, like, for anybody who is expecting us to potentially give you like just some
Secret
rid-
sauce.
yeah, just like exercises that they were going to start throwing into their program and do all this crazy shit. Like what we just told you is what I say what Luke just told you is, like, in my opinion, exactly what every coach should be doing, and regardless if you're an athlete or not, really. And it's not the sexy answer, but it's the right answer, because I mean, I remember seeing and reading loads of articles about like the top S&C guys working with NFL teams and probably in most sports. And during preseason, even after training these guys for years, the first thing they do is they break down movement patterns, right? They make sure, okay, like, let's try to get all these shitty habits that you've picked up during the season because you're a freak athlete. Let's just weed those out, because we want to make sure that, like Luke said, you can squat properly, you can lunge properly, you can hinge properly, and that you start building those motor control or like movement patterns, right? So there's a reason why we do that, because of what Luke said: performance long term and injury prevention. Because your best availability is, or no, what is it? What's the saying? Your best capability is your availability. They always say that in the NFL.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. So basically, if you're hurt all the time, then your stock's going down, right? So you should
Yeah.
probably take care of yourself.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a time for complex movements, right? And as I said, that's the fun part, but I think a lot of people just need to hear the simplistic stuff initially,
Mhm.
right? There's a time for, I love progressing athletes on complex movements. Like, there's a time for contralateral, landmine, lunge, and knee lift, and this and that. And I can make a really long exercise and I can start listing some advanced exercises, but I think, the basis is what's most important. And then we progress when you have a coach around you to help you with those advanced exercises.
Yeah, earn the right to progress all the time. And again, just to finish that point off is like if you start at the most, advanced point of your fitness journey, like where do you go from there, right? Like especially if you get really really good at it. And I always tell kids like in the gym, like I'll always see there's like 16-year-old kids that come to my gym and they're huge, bro. Like they're massive, they're moving weight, but they're also in the gym like 3.5 hours every day and they're pumping so much volume. And I'll always go up to them like, tell me how many sets you've just done on chest alone today. And they're like, oh, about like 30. I'm like, okay, how old are you? Like 16. Okay, if you keep doing this in like 5 years, you're gonna have to be in the gym like 8 hours a day because your body's gonna be so used to all this volume that all you can do is just add more volume. I was
Yeah,
like, you know what I
yeah.
mean?
And the other thing is like, a lot of the younger crowd don't recognize the potential for injuries, and you won't get an injury right away. Maybe like, it might not hit you right away. Tendonitis, bicep tendonitis, or, a disc bulge or something like that. These things take time to progress, but they will hit you later
Mhm.
on if you continue to overload your body and not, progressively adapt in terms of your load. You can't just jump into a training program and start training at all hours of the day.
No. And then you're 16, so God knows what you're doing because I know what I was doing at 16. And these kids in the UK, they're different breeds, man.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
yeah, it's different. So they're probably not sleeping and they're doing some weird stuff outside the gym. So you're probably not recovering. You're probably not recovering really well, which is a whole different can of worms. So sweet. All right. So up to this point, before we kind of get to the final bit, and I'm gonna have to have you on in another episode because there's so many things we could talk about. But up to this point, the biggest things you should have picked up so far is keep it simple, right? In the beginning, no matter what your goal is, if it's strength, if it's jumping higher, if it's running faster, like just do the basics, right? Focus on your movement patterns and then have a plan, right? So whether you go buy a program, whether it's from Luke, whether it's from me, whether it's from, a top coach in the industry, like get a plan, try not to wing it because it's going to benefit you massively. Um, and then just kind of start researching. Like, I think a lot of people these days don't take the time to research. And unfortunately, there's a lot of coaches out there that are going to take your money and probably not really give you a good service. So
Mhm.
again, don't be afraid to just go watch a couple good YouTube videos out there. Most of the time, I'd say the best coaches aren't the ones that have millions of views either. I would like to think we are some of those coaches with maybe lack of millions of views. One day though, Luke, right? One day.
One day, man, one day.
So yeah, so hopefully you've picked up a few good bits so far, which takes us to the kind of last part of what I want to go through, which is kind of like an overrated, underrated section. And I'm going to milk this a bit because I think there's a lot of knowledge bombs Luke could be dropping, but he's holding back today. So overrated, underrated. Took this off good old Gary V on Insta, so I thought I'd snag
Yeah.
it. So first thing is barbell jump squats. Overrated or underrated?
Overrated.
Okay.
Overrated.
Why are they overrated?
Because I think there's got to be a more optimal way to load a jump.
Hmm.
And I think there are more optimal ways to load a jump, in my opinion. Right? I don't think that we need a barbell on our cervical spine and having risk of, when landing, it landing, on your cervical spine and potentially in a flex position. I mean, I just see injury risk, right?
Hmm.
It's too easy to load a jump squat with dumbbells. Hold
Hmm.
dumbbells.
Yeah.
And if you need more weight, hold heavier dumbbells, but you should never be jump squatting to an extent of such high load that you need a barbell anyways. And I
Hmm.
think it's just going to provide additional injury risk. Also, it's going to, push your body more forward, especially if you're like a high bar squatter, even if you're a low bar squatter, that load is placed, superior of your thoracic area. And, it's going to manipulate your movement pattern.
Hmm. Yeah. Agree. 100% agree. So many other ways you could do things, which is a lot safer. Okay. So second question, um, flexibility, right? If we just talk stretching, do you think stretching overrated, underrated?
I think it's properly rated.
Okay. There we go. First one. Yeah.
um, Usually I would say there was a time that I would likely say overrated, to be honest, because I recognize and when studying professors and doctors like Dr. Stuart McGill, who's a very well recognized back professor at Waterloo University, and he talks about the rehab of back pain and then the improvement of performance. A lot of people have talked about how stability is much more important than mobility or flexibility, right? So there's a lot of good research that talks about having optimal stability or strength around joints, and the fact that if you're too flexible in certain joint range of motions, then you could be increasing injury risk, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's also research that states the opposite and tells us how good stretching is for us, and static stretching and dynamic stretching prior to workouts, and then PNF stretching, proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, and how improving range in certain joints will be beneficial for certain athletes that need that, right? So if your movement pattern is compromised at the shoulder joint, for example, in terms of like shoulder flexion, and you can only get here, then obviously you're going to need to do some flexibility work to move optimally, right? So I think, first of all, you need an individualized approach. Second of all, you need to recognize the importance of stability and strength.
Mm-hmm.
And third of all, I think it's a good practice for people to get in 2 to 3 times a week.
Awesome. Yeah, the other reason I was asking was because I know you said you had your corrective kind of strategy qualification. So I thought, I'm assuming there's a lot of mobility, flexibility type of stuff that you have to do with some of the guys. But
Yeah.
then at the same time, there's probably guys that overdo it like anything else, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that corrective exercise, especially I forget exactly the the periodized plan of what they wanted us to teach, but I got the basic idea. But basically, you want to isolate certain muscle groups, inhibit certain muscle groups, and then strengthen certain muscle groups and improve range in certain muscle groups to correct the exercise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or aid with an injury or performance, right? So it's breaking down that joint segment and recognizing which muscles need to be lengthened, which muscles need to be strengthened, and then carrying out your programming once you know that information.
Awesome. Good.
Yeah.
Great explanation there. Kind of carrying on with the flexibility, kind of mobility side of things. Massage guns, overrated, underrated.
Uh, they're probably a little overrated, but it's not that they're bad. It's just
Yeah.
everyone's on a hype about them.
Yeah.
Like it's going to be doing it would be doing I haven't looked into it too much, but I've studied myofascial release, which is like foam rolling and things like that. And I have studied the research that states that foam rolling on like a vibrating roller and things like that is actually more beneficial than just foam rolling on a regular roller. So that vibration element is actually a little bit more beneficial, but you're not going to see like wild improvements
Hmm.
compared to just rolling out and going through regular myofascial release. It's not going to be like game changing. But
Have you used one?
yeah, I have.
The vibrating rollers or whatever?
Oh, the vibrating rollers, no, but I've used like the
The massage gun. Man,
massage.
the roller, because I got a free massage gun roller and like loads of kit. Like, have you seen you know how you can get like like a lacrosse ball, right? Loads of people use that lacrosse ball for like, deep tissue stuff. Have you seen the ones that you can get that are like smaller, medium, bigger that vibrate as well?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I got like 2 grand worth of stuff from work. Still can't believe I got it. But those things, man, they melt. It's like a hot knife through butter. If you're sore and you use a roller, it's like you feel a million times better. I don't think the massage gun does the same thing personally, but yeah, the roller's next level. Sorry for cutting you off.
No, no problem, man. No, and yeah, that's why I would say I mean, I'm thinking about in terms of like like actually putting force into it as well.
Hmm.
I haven't used it enough to really comment, but I'm just, I'm thinking, and I think in terms of force, like you can completely put all your body weight on a lacrosse ball and things like that, right? So you can get a lot more myofascial release there and stimulate some blood flow and break up those fascial adhesions and things like that. In terms of like a vibrating gun, I mean, I think it will be beneficial for some people, but I don't think it's like game changing.
Yeah, I think
And
it's
rollers are super, much more cost efficient.
yeah,
You know?
big time. Yeah, it's definitely a hype train. Definitely a hype train. Um, calves. training your calf muscles, right? So soleus, gastroc. So for those people that don't know, is like the muscles in your calf. Okay, you can do different exercise to train those. So is that underrated or overrated? Like just training your calves, because I think a lot of people don't, and I think a lot of people do, and maybe they do so maybe not the best way. So what do you think?
I think underrated. You
Hmm.
know, I think a lot of people would likely benefit from training their gastroc and their soleus more, as well as the other side in training their tibialis anterior a little bit more.
That's
And
been a game changer for me.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah, yeah, and promoting more range and dorsiflexion. I mean, that's massive too, right? So, that dorsiflexion, I don't really know how to describe that to your listeners for those who don't know what that is, but it allows you to go into optimal squat form a lot of the time and things like that. But yeah, training, anterior and posterior of the lower leg is very important, I think. And a lot of people skip out on it.
And you just look more balanced and you don't look like that guy that everyone's calling with chicken legs. So just train your calves. If you got bigger
Exactly.
calves, you look good. You just look better.
Exactly, man.
Simple. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, Dorsey, for anybody who's like, what the hell is Dorsey and flexion, plantar flexion? So when you're pulling your toes up, right, towards your shin, that's basically like you're going into dorsiflexion. So when you're squatting, that's basically what's happening, right? Your toes getting closer to your shin. And when you're pointing your toes down, right, you're trying to like straighten your shin all the way through to your toe. That's when we're plantar flexing. That's basically, people must think like, who the hell made these words up, right? And you're like, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. Okay, cool. When do we talk? I've got a few more. I'm gonna try to keep you all night here, even
Sure,
though
man.
it's only what, eight
It's
o'clock
later
over there.
there, so I'm not worried about it.
Yeah, it's midnight. It's almost midnight over here, man. It's all good.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
good. 8:40.
nice, nice. So one that's I think a bit controversial. Rice, right? So rest, ice, compression, elevation, all that kind of stuff. You hear a lot of people talk about doing the opposite now, which is the whole basically heat rather than ice. So is rice overrated, underrated, or properly rated? Because I know you're obviously like in the whole exercise physiology stuff. What do you think?
Overrated, in my opinion. Yeah, I
Mm,
think I think ice is overrated. I think I think there's a couple components to this, right? So, you're away at a basketball tournament and you sprain your ankle. Okay, so what you're going to get initially is a lot of swelling and pain. And
mhm,
so ice will bring down that swelling and decrease pain acutely, meaning like short term.
mhm,
But your rehab to that sprained ankle will be longer because you didn't place heat. Okay, so it might help you for that tournament, but if you're looking to just rehab from that injury quicker,
mhm.
then it will actually lengthen your rehab process, right? So if you just injure, and this is most people, right? Most people aren't away for a basketball tournament when they injure themselves. So, in the case of a tournament or athletic event, ice could have a beneficial play in the recovery process. But if you just sprain an ankle, or like you can talk about any type of injury. I think heat is usually much more beneficial because you're stimulating blood flow and you're stimulating healing of that area, right? And that ice will decrease blood flow, decrease swelling, and decrease healing, and it's going to prolong the healing process. It's going to feel better short term, right?
Mm.
It's not going to be as swollen, but it's going to take longer to rehab from that injury.
Mm. Would you say, because this is one thing I've been trying to look at, I mean, and I might just not be looking hard enough, but it seems to me like there's not really that much like literature on this at the moment, or at least like from what I've seen, like there probably is somewhere, but from what I can tell, like when you Google it or when you search it, it seems like rice is still the common thing most people are going to recommend, probably because of all right, it's not going to feel as bad and it's going to decrease the swelling. So for like a visual perspective, I feel like I'm getting better. But
Yeah,
I'm always kind of trying to look for
for sure.
somewhere, something that's kind of like pointing towards the data, right? Saying like, actually, no, you could probably do this better by putting heat, working through range of motion. That's kind of actually what I recommend to a lot of guys. I've had a few kids lately, actually, like on the courts go, hey, like my knee's feeling a little bit weird. It's a bit swollen or ankle. I'm like, you know what? Put some heat on it, work it through range, draw the alphabet with your foot and like just be smart with it. Still do some proprioception balance work so you don't kind of lose that as long as it doesn't hurt. And then they're like, okay, cool. And then they come back like a week and they're fine. Right.
Yeah, yep. Oh
But
yeah.
I thought I'd ask you, like, have you seen any literature about any of that stuff or?
I'm just trying to think. I can't remember one specific article that I've read, and I don't know which textbook I've drawn that information from, but I know it had to be research based.
Mm.
I know I didn't make it up. And logically about the rehabilitation process, it makes perfect sense. But no, that's a good question, and I can't pinpoint one piece of literature or one textbook right now. But
Yeah, no, it's all good. I remember, I mean, I've been looking for some stuff too because I think it's something that I'm gonna probably like post about in the future,
yeah,
and
sure,
people are
I'll
gonna
send
be
you
like,
something if I find something. Yeah.
yeah, because people are gonna be like, what do you mean? No ice? Especially like the older generation. Like if I tell my mom and dad not to ice, gonna be like, what do you mean?
Oh,
Yeah, yeah, it's
oh,
gonna so
I can't teach my parents a thing.
yeah, yeah,
I'm still in middle school in their mind, man. I
yeah.
don't know.
Oh well, one day, bro.
Yeah.
Cool. I had a couple other ones. Minimalist shoes, right? So for anybody wondering what that is, so like shoes that don't have like a massively raised heel. So if you've seen Vibrams before, I actually bought a pair a couple weeks ago. Best thing I've ever bought, so as far as I'm concerned. But do you think they're overrated, underrated, or just right?
I think underrated. I think
Cool.
minimalist shoes are kind of the way to go. What do you mean in terms of minimalist shoes? Are those the ones with like the, separate toes, or just like not much to the heel?
Yeah, so I'd say I'm like a bit of both. I think like if you go to the extreme of the minimalist shoe, you're taking
Yeah,
Vibrams, which are like the separate toe shoes,
those are
which is what I bought recently.
yeah.
Which for people wondering why, well, you got so many little sensors in your feet, and your feet obviously are just like they're the ones sending everything up to the rest of their body all the time. So from a sensory perspective, it just makes sense. If you think about like your foot's not just crammed into a shoe, and it's just so many benefits to it. And from a training perspective, it feels great. I feel more stable. Like you have to get used to the kind of like the ground not the ground contact, but just that force absorption of not having that cushion on the shoe. And then obviously, like if you kind of go a little bit more simple, you're just thinking shoes that don't have a big heel. So most people wear like Air Maxes and Nikes or Adidas, and they've got big foam like all the way through.
Mhm.
That's you're not really getting much sensory feedback from like a ground contact perspective every time you're stepping or running or jumping. So yeah, so you said underrated. Does that make sense?
Yeah, underrated. No, that's what I think, and I think there's literature out there that shows actually that you'll end up adapting to, most shoes anyways.
Mm,
But if we think like, and you'll adapt well to whatever shoe you'll have on over time, right? If you progressively load your training and this and that, right? Those are the vital components, is like your training and your load and how much are you running a week and this and that, right? So that's more important than your shoe, right? But the shoe, in terms of like, I always like to relate things back to functionality and functional performance and functional movement, right? So
mhm.
like, I rather be able to move with, no raised heel naturally without shoes on, as I do with shoes on. And so I kind of I think the minimalist approach is best or more optimal, right? So I
Mm.
think it's underrated. Yeah.
Yeah, you look funny though. My missus still can't get over it. Like she's
Oh,
like, "What?" Yeah, she's taking Snapchats and Insta videos and putting polls on her stories, asking what people think. I'm like, "Sweet, awesome, thanks, appreciate that." So yeah, just get ready for that one. And yeah, we'll end on this last one. We'll end on this last one. Um, let's say knee braces, ankle braces, any kind of brace, lower extremity, right? And you could probably expand this for like other things too, but if you're talking more just ankles and knees, overrated. And like let's say you don't have like you haven't had any surgery, you hadn't have any major injuries, you just kind of wear it because your coach tells you to, or your parents tell you to. And you just kind of like, oh well, like I'm kind of dinged up and this just makes me feel good. Overrated or underrated?
I think overrated.
Hmm.
Um, I think, as I mentioned prior, the most important, the most vital pieces of information here are your load tolerance. So you're training over time. So, okay, what has caused you to have plantar fasciitis? What has caused you to have anterior lateral knee pain? Is it IT band syndrome? Like we can take a look at addressing that. We can take a look at addressing these things with corrective exercises and a review of your training regimen, right?
Mhm.
In terms of braces, they're acute fixes, right? If you find pain relief short term, then fine, but I definitely wouldn't start wearing a brace all day, every day for multiple weeks at a time. That's just not smart, in my opinion. I would take a look at the things that are crucial, like okay, what is wrong at the joint? What's structurally going on here? Do you have
Mhm.
pain? What's the reasoning behind this? And take a look at some corrective exercises and inhibition type flexibility work that we can do to improve this area. And then our low tolerance, like why did this happen in the first place? Was it a faulty movement pattern? Was it inability to adapt to progressive load over time and things like that? And then readjust your training cycle and don't get caught up in a brace.
Mm. Yeah, it's just a fake security blanket, and I think a lot of people need to listen to your advice and go, "What's causing the problem?" And like I personally think that the reason I had any knee injuries whatsoever was because I wore an ankle brace, and I went from having completely normal, completely fine range of motion of the ankle to limiting it quite substantially in, you know, one season. Never wore ankle braces my entire life. All of a sudden, I wear it one season because I had a few strains, which, by the way, I think was related to randomly getting insoles like orthotics, because
Mm-hmm.
another guy had some, and my dad was like, "Oh, like apparently those are good." And I was like, "Ah, sure, we'll try them out." And the next thing you know, I'm spraining my ankles like crazy, right? And as soon as I got rid of those, I was fine. And then just basketball, you get it one sprained ankle every now and then. It just happens, like unfortunately. And then yeah, then I put an ankle brace on, and then all of a sudden it's like if I'm going from lunging and doing all these movements with really good range of motion at the ankle, and all of a sudden that stops. Well, guess where it's taking the rest of the hit? My knee's going to start taking the hit, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what eventually caused like little like meniscus stuff on mine. And I always tell the kids, man, I'm like, why are you wearing that? Why do you need that? Oh, well, my mom and my dad and my coaches tell me I should. It was like, why? Like, you're just hindering yourself. Personally, that's my opinion.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
Yeah. So yeah, cool, man. Well, definitely a good round of overrated, underrated. So good insight from Luke there. Appreciate the time. So just a quick little outro, mate. For anybody who's looking for any advice, any coaching, I'm not sure if you do any kind of online stuff, but I'm sure you're definitely open to it if you don't do it. But I can see you nodding. You definitely do. Yeah. Where can people find you? Where's the best place for them to look for you? All that stuff.
So Instagram is Luke MacMillan underscore LukeMacMillan underscore. That's where I have my link and link to my business services and all that. And I was reaching out to you to ask for online training advice. It's something that I've recently uh, dove into actually. And so yeah, I do some online training and physical training here in the Fredericton or Mukto area. So reach out if you need anything. And then I've got a YouTube channel too. So if you want to check out some of my videos and subscribe, you can just type in Luke MacMillan on YouTube, and I'm sure my face will pop up on something. So if you're interested in exercise physiology, exercise science, performance, rehabilitation, or if you're a trainer like Dan and I, looking to increase client load, then check it out.
Yeah, it's a good shout actually. If you need advice on anything as a coach, like go to Luke, man. Go to Luke for all that physiology stuff. He'll help you out all day. But yeah, so no, thanks, Luke. Massively appreciate it. And as always, I'm Dan Q. You can check out all the info for the podcast. Luke's links will be in the description. And yeah, you can find me on Insta and Facebook at Abante Performance. So no, appreciate the time, bro. And yeah, I'm gonna stop this bad boy right here.